This is it. This is my garden this year. These are the seed packets for the seeds of everything I'm growing in my vegetable garden this year. But all it is a stack of seeds at this point. Now I have to figure out which beds are going to get which plants. Do you want to see how I do that? Well, then join me today as I show you how I figure out my garden bed plan. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I like to have my garden planned months before the weather's actually good enough to have a garden, because some of these seeds are going to need to be started weeks ahead of time indoors. And having a good idea of how many seeds that are going to be started, and more importantly, where those seedlings are going to go, takes some time. You can't wait until it's suddenly a warm day in the middle of summer to decide what your garden's going to look like. It works best for me to do it in winter. Today, I have to figure out where all of these plants are going to go. And I've started with a facsimile of my garden. In my vegetable garden area, I've got 6 beds. And so I've labeled these tags 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then off to the side, I've got a big area. I've got a bed on the north side, a long bed on the west side, and a long bed on the south side. This process does not need to take place exclusively indoors, especially on a nice, warm, sunny day like this. Even though it's the middle of winter, it feels good outside. So I'm in my garden reminding myself of what it was I thought I was going to do. A month ago, on a cold, snowy day, I was standing out here and I set some preliminary plans in place. I decided I was going to grow squash in this bed, and in this bed where I've got some Napa cabbage overwintering, I'm going to put in some carrots and some radishes. I already have the garlic growing over there. This bed is going to be for peppers. And I also set aside these beds for squash as well. It isn't until I actually have my seed packets in front of me that I can figure out just exactly where they should go. I knew I was going to grow a lot of tomatoes. Well, it ends up I'm doing 12 different varieties. And I want to grow at least 2, maybe 3 of some of these varieties. So I need to find space. I need to figure out which beds are going to support between 24 and 36 tomato plants. The peppers, I've got 11 varieties of these. And again, 2 or 3 plants of each. They don't take up as much space as the tomatoes, but I've got to figure it out. And when I throw in all the rest of these, now I need to take the individual seed packets and I'm going to place them on the individual beds to see how it's going to work. This bed is still appropriate for the determinate and dwarf tomatoes as I planned. So it's going to be easy to take those seed packets and lay them down to figure out if they're going to fit in this bed. I'll begin with my tomatoes and that bed specifically to show that this process may not be as easy as you think it is. You may have to do a little bit of homework ahead of time. Now, when I look at my tomato seeds in particular, I'm noticing that some of the companies do not identify if it's an indeterminate or a determinate type of tomato. For the seeds and such and the Baker Creek, I had to look them up because that information isn't on the seed packet like it is with the Pine Tree Seeds or the Seed Savers Exchange. Now, Southern Exposure Seed Exchange does have 2 of the varieties that I purchased labeled as dwarf, but then there's this Geranium Kiss. It's not labeled as a dwarf tomato, but if you look it up online, you'll see it's a determinate tomato on most sources. Some sources show it as an indeterminate. If you specifically dig down, you can find that it is more likely to be a dwarf. And of course, I had to go to the site to see if this packet was a dwarf or an indeterminate or a determinate. With all that predetermined, it didn't take long, but I still had to do it. I can now choose the 3 dwarf varieties I have and place them on that bed in my garden. With the rest of the tomatoes identified as indeterminate, I'll go ahead and place all of these on my south bed in that big garden area. As I look at all of the seed packets I have, I realize I don't have as many squash seed packets as I thought I was going to buy. So that bed and this bed and this bed that I had set aside to grow squash, I don't think all 3 beds are going to be necessary. So now it's time to figure out which beds are going to grow squash and what's going into the beds that aren't growing squash. It turns out I only ordered 3 different squash plants. I've got a Long Island cheese, a Constata romanesca, and a Tahitian melon. Now, I think I can actually get away with growing all of these in that second bed. I'm only going to do 2 plants of each, and 6 plants in a full-size bed actually works for me. I did forget to put together a bed for my cucumbers. So one of these beds that I thought might be growing the squash, it'll be my cucumber bed. So all these seeds will go into bed number 5. Now I am growing some pumpkins, 2 different varieties. I want to put up a trellis and grow these pumpkins vertically. So it makes complete sense that one of those squash beds that is no longer used for squash could be used for pumpkin, a type of squash. So the pumpkins on trellises are going into bed number 4. Now bed number 3 is the one that has that Napa cabbage. I'd already determined that I was going to do some radishes and some carrots. So I've got 2 packets of radishes and 2 packets of carrots. Those are going into bed number 3. For bed number 6, that's one of my identified pepper beds, but I have a whole bunch of peppers to figure out. So I'm going to come back to these and move on to my melons. This is still a good space for my melons, so I'm going to continue with the plan for the melons here. But because I don't have as many, or I'm not going to be growing as many as I originally thought, this will be where all the melons go. I'm not going to need to grow them anyplace else in the garden. With only 2 packages of the melon seeds, and knowing they're going into that hugelkultur mound, I'll place them off to the side to represent where that bed is. I didn't actually make a post-it note, but that's going to be very easy to remember. Now, getting back to the peppers, I've divided my peppers into 2 basic categories. I have a whole bunch of hot peppers, and then I have peppers that vary in sweetness and heat level that I want to grow for the purpose of making paprika. So all of the hot peppers are going to go into bed number 6. It's going to be big enough for multiple plants of these hot peppers, and I'll be able to remember that this is my hot pepper bed. All the others are going to slide over into the west bed that I have in this big garden area. This long bed will still be good for peppers. Since I have so many and I'm not going to be able to put them all in that first bed, I'll put the overflow here. But as I mentioned in that previous video, I thought I might do some melons here, but the other space is going to be more than enough. So instead of melons, I'm going to go ahead and put some of my tomatoes in this long bed in addition to the south side bed, just because I have so many to deal with. And so all of my beds have a plan except for this north bed, which I specifically set aside as an overflow for the plants that didn't have another home. And so a plant like this one, this Gold Rush zucchini, makes sense to put it into that bed. I don't have a home for these Gold Rush yellow beans. I'll stick those against the trellis in that bed too. As for the Filderkraut cabbage, well, I think I'll still have some space here in bed number 3 where I have the Napa cabbage growing. So I'm going to go ahead and add this package to this bed, and I'll just cut down on some of the numbers of radishes and carrots that I'm growing. I have 2 packages of beets. I want to grow a lot of this avalanche and albino. It makes sense to stick these in the overflow bed as well, where I can give them some extra space. And all that I have left are some lettuce seeds and a strawberry spinach. And as I look at where I'm going to put all of these, I think I can put some of these into the overflow bed, and I'll actually start some of these here real soon, maybe within the next week or 2 in my greenhouse. So I didn't set aside a post-it note for my greenhouse. Let's go ahead and say that we're going to grow these lettuces in the greenhouse, represented by this space up here, and also outside when I can work the soil into this overflow bed. And that's it. That's all of my seed packages identified by the bed they're going into. Developing a garden plan takes time, and I like getting outside and going inside, developing that preliminary plan outside and then seeing if it fits with my seeds. And in the beginning, when I'm outside trying to figure it out, I'm just getting a general idea of what I'm planning to grow. Then when I actually get to the seed catalogs and start ordering, by the time I see what seed packets have actually arrived, it may not match up with that preliminary plan. So that's where this phase comes into play, actually trying to put the specific plants into the specific beds. And by laying everything out and seeing it visually, both outdoors and indoors, I think I've got a good plan moving forward so that I can start some of those seeds indoors, and I'll know when to start the other seeds directly outside. To see more about how I do this planning process, check this out now. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.